on today?
Phil, I hope so. I'll be disappointed if he's not. There's maybe a queue of people trying to get there before him, so that's maybe become a thing.
Let's see. Good evening, guys. Welcome along to our Thursday night Blether with myself and Russell from Inverurie Whisky Shop. Pop on a comment. Let us know that you're here. Let us know what you're drinking, and how your day's been or how your week's been. We've almost hit the end of it. Quite a busy week. Lots of new stuff coming in and going out. And we've got David Muir first to say hello. Phil, you're slacking.
David's had a tough day. He's been sleeping as well, so that's good that he's managed to get on straight away. Well done, David.
Gugs. I don't know. Gugs. So David, were you that keen to beat Phil to the hello you forgot how to spell? or do you Glugs? I think it's David doesn't do whiskey by the glass, he does it by the glug, doesn't he?
That's a definite photo finish one there, though, David. You've definitely taken that one today.
Yeah. Well done, Phil. You had a good run of it.
Yeah, seconds, no disgrace.
Let us know what you're drinking, guys. David, Phil, let us know, and the rest of the gang. We've got a great chat lined up tonight with Scott from the Tomatin Distillery coming on. Yeah, that was his mission tonight, to beat Phil. You have it pre-entered. There you go, copy and paste it. Yeah, I don't know. Does he qualify because of the spelling mistake? I think that could be a disqualification.
Oh, is it like a drug test or something? Is it? Disqualifying the technicality. Oh, that's harsh.
I think so. Well,
that's harsh.
We'll make it that he can have the final say. So what are you drinking tonight, Russell?
I guess true to form, I tried to think it was something else, but whenever we're on brand, I always go for. I suppose I'm lucky that most weeks I've actually got something from the distillery or the company or whoever we're talking to. So this is the Tomatin handful that I picked up when I picked your one up as well up at the distillery last year. I dated it for the date of our wedding. Yes, it's the Oloroso. But we still used it as our wedding dram, so I've still got a wee bit left. So I thought I'd try that tonight. And I've still got the samples of the wine cask ones, so I'll see how things are going. I might have a wee drop of that as well.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly got. I've got the red salt. I've actually got tucked away here the Monbaziac as well, which I might delve into. What I've poured just now is actually one from Robertson's at Pitlochry. One of their so the Alt Doer 8-year-old. So Alt Doer, I think, was the Blair Athol. Okay. Really nice. I bought it when I was down there.
Nice. I remember you saying when you were on holiday,
yeah. It was the night we had the Blether with Billy Walker, actually.
That's right.
The day I bought this, so I poured it then. And honestly, it's a really cracking whiskey. I completely forgot I had it. It wasn't until we're clearing out. And I found the tube, and I thought, I've just got the tube left. I lifted it. There was a bottle inside. I picked up, and I was like, actually, I've probably got any left. So
that's like finding a £20 note in your wallet, in your jacket pocket.
Brilliant. So David's trying to backtrack now. It's a Gugs is a Campbelldown trade.
It's a Campbelldown trade.
We'll have to get into that and see if that's true or if that's just
it's funny the G is quite close to the Y on the keyboard, but we'll let him off of that
one. Good evening, Keith. Good evening, Alistair, coming in. Well, I suppose you're not here to really listen to us blather crap or what's in our glasses. Let's get Scott on and have a chat. See, and again, always the worry here, but coming on fine. Scott, can you hear us? Okay.
I can hear you. Good evening, Gugs. How's it going?
We're doing great. Thank you very much.
Is that something you come across in your time, Scott?
I came across it about 3 minutes ago, yeah.
A well-known Campbellton phrase.
Yeah. Do you know, it's not too far off. So up in the area that I live, near in Roshire, near Dingwall, there's a phrase you call someone a gudgie, you know. So gudgie. It's not a million miles off of that. So
yeah. I was a few years ago. I was in a car accident. I cracked the bone in my neck, so I was in hospital for a week. And the guy next to me called me constantly Gadgie.
Yeah.
Gadgie. If I ever hear that word again, it was just a week constantly. He broke his neck falling off a trampoline. landed on his head. Proper broke his neck. He was in one of these huge metal braces. I just had a collar on, and I was just like, "Hey, Gadgy, hey, Gadgy." It was like, "Oh no." So that was my torture. That was actually
a really horrible word.
Yeah, in that really nasal kind of Glaswegian accent. It was like, that was more painful.
You're never sure if it's like a nice term or if you're being insulted. You know, I think if someone came from an area that had never heard that before and was called a gudgy, they might take offence to it.
I think I'm pretty sure down in Perthshire. I'm pretty sure my wife's from Abernethy in Perthshire. I'm pretty sure gadgy down there is like a tramp or a. I think it's a derogatory term down there.
It doesn't sound nice, is it?
I think so. Yeah. I need to ask.
It's not that you just use somebody as your best gudgy, would you?
But you would hear someone say, "I'm sick of that gudgy." You know, it's kind of on that rope.
There we go. So a nice wee dialect for anyone else in the chat tonight. If you've got a dialect or a word that you love to use or hate to hear, pop it on the chat and we'll have a blether about it. Who else have we got? So Phil is drinking the Glenmorangie Takagi. Not one I've come across, so let us know what you think of that. David, yes, you have started something.
Yes, you have, yeah, absolutely. Again.
I don't know if Phil's doing that deliberately or not.
It's suit and fruity.
Oh man, has everyone been drinking today? It is Thursday, isn't it?
It's payday. It's payday, so that's it. Like,
So Scott, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's get back on track. To say that there is no track tonight. There never is during the Blether. We like to take it as it comes and see where it goes. So you started, or you work at Tomatin. You're kind of much more than just a brand ambassador. You're involved with the cask selection, the blending, and then kind of all that side of things. So how did it all start for you? Because you're quite local to Tomatin, isn't it? Was that the start of your whiskey journey working for the company, or?
Not at all. No. So I live about 45 miles north of Tomatin, so about 20-minute drive north of Inverness in Allness, Dalmore country if you want. But I guess anyone that's from here would probably call it Taninic country. So grew up surrounded by whiskey. Everyone knew someone whose dad was a distiller. You walk to school in the morning and you've got the smell of like the mash and things like that. So it was always around. Almost to the detriment, almost to the point that I just took it for granted, never looked into it, was never interested in it. And then when I eventually started going to university, I went to study Scottish history with absolutely no idea what I was going to do at the end of it. And I'd always been told, work as much as you can whenever you can. So had a part-time job in the supermarket, and then every summer I would work for HIS, for Highland Industrial Supplies, delivering catering supplies all around the north of Scotland, which was quite fun for when I was 18, 19, 20, in between my summers in university. But then going into that end of that third year, going into the last year, I thought it probably does make sense to find some sort of job related to what I'm studying, so at least I can go down that track. And one of the girls that was in the course with me pinged me an email one morning saying Tomatin Distillery are looking for a research intern for the summer to research the history of the distillery. So this is 2012 we're talking about. And I applied for that job, had quite simply the worst interview ever. It was a total car crash. Even before I got there, the seam of my trousers split from front to back, and I had to run down to my mum's work to get them stitched up. It was just a train wreck of a day. But somehow I got that job. And for the summer of 2012, my job was to research the history of Tomatin Distillery. And, kind of putting that in perspective of where the brand is, the brand has quadrupled in growth in terms of volume over the last 10 years. So back at 2010, 11, 12, they were still finding out what the brand story was. They had the product, they had the package, they just didn't really know what they wanted to be telling people. So researched the history, got a huge swathe of information, and then on my last day was, given a cake, given a wee bottle of whiskey, and was expecting to be on my merry way when the sales director at the time, Stephen Bremner, now our managing director, asked me to go through to the boardroom, and I thought it was going to be very much a thank you very much and good luck with your studies when you go back to uni. But what he said was, we are probably going to be looking for a brand ambassador. So while you're going into your final year, would you like to stay on part-time and work in marketing, work in sales, work in production? And by this point in time, I was hooked. I'd already gone for job interviews at other distilleries to be a tour guide. I was whiskey. That's what I'm going to do now within only 8 weeks. So I said, absolutely, sign me up. The next day I went in and handed in my notice at Morrison's, and it was the greatest feeling ever. I could work for a distillery. And so for that year, while I was finishing my degree, I worked at Tomatin a couple of days a week in all aspects of the distillery. Got to spend some time in the mash house, the still house, the warehouse, mostly in marketing though. And then just as my degree came to an end, I got taken into the boardroom again and told, we're not going to go ahead with the brand ambassador role. I was like, oh no, absolutely gutted. And they said, would you like to work in the sales department? I said, absolutely. And so between 2013 and 2017, I was responsible for all of our sales to Europe. I eventually became the European sales manager. So that was an incredible experience because it was still at the time where, and it still is in many ways, a time where everybody does a little bit of everything. So although my role was absolutely a commercial one, I'd be over in the market hosting tastings. I'd be going to all the festivals. I was very much a half commercial role, half brand ambassador role as the company was growing so much. And then in 2017, I was offered the opportunity to go and work for White & Mackay. And I thought that's going to be a great experience no matter what. I absolutely loved Tomatin. I had long conversations with Stephen about it, and he always encouraged me, sort of saying, absolutely get as much experience as you can, and the door's always open, but go. And so I went to White & Mackay and took on this role as venture markets manager, which was basically looking after all of the markets where you could get shot bombed or robbed if you went there. So that was a lot of fun. That was a great experience, spending a bit of time in Kazakhstan and getting ripped off in Ukraine and going to Israel and places like that. It was really exciting. But a year later, I was having a beer and a curry with Stephen, who had just been made managing director, and my old colleague Graham, who was now the sales director. And they were saying, right, we're going ahead with the brand ambassador role. And we had a few beers, we had a few drams, we had a few cocktails. And I woke up the next morning realizing that I'd agreed to go back to Tomatin. So popped down to the distillery at that time. And at that time, my wife was pregnant, so I went down to speak to Stephen and said, absolutely want this job. I would love to be the ambassador for Tomatin, but I'm probably not going to be able to travel as much as most ambassadors, because I'm about to have a baby. He's like, well, that's a good thing because we're also looking for someone that's going to be involved in cask selection, blending, maturation, and it was just like the stars had aligned. I was by this point in time, I was a fully fledged whiskey geek, and not only being able to tell people about whiskey, but being able to make that whiskey and then present it to people. It really was the dream job, and that's what I do now.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. A great story.
And it was during when you were researching the history. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to bring up this very secretive fact that you found out about Tomatin. It's Scotland's only Higland whiskey.
yeah. So people won't be able to see it fully, but behind our three talking heads tonight is a little banner that sits beside our office block. And if you had been taking the train past Tomatin from Inverness to even just Aviemore, you would have seen this banner time and time again. And it must have been there for about 4 or 5 years. And then we got a message from somebody saying, did you know that your banner says Higland single malt rather than Highland? And we had to kind of react quite quickly and go, "Oh, well done, you've won the prize." You and we're like, "Oh no, go and get the banner down." And it was only when someone was taking the banner down that they realised the same artwork had been used on the side of the van for the last 5 years as well. So we've been driving around Inverness and everything as Tomatin Higland single malt. So, still to this day don't know how that one slipped through the net, but I'm fully on board with David Muir's spelling mistake, and I think with that in mind, he absolutely was the first on the
Well done, David.
We've John Creasy was just popped on a question. A comment. Scott is a great example of how whiskey makes you look younger, or am I just getting old?
I don't quite know how to respond. I always tell people I'm maybe not as young as I look, but I feel like over the last year and a half I've started to look a little bit older as well. So maybe it's whiskey to a certain limit.
Yeah, maybe it's we've got Paul on as well. So Paul's a regular viewer and was on with us a couple of weeks ago. Paul Dempsey from the Spey, which we
how are you doing, pal? Paul, I wonder if Paul's down in London this weekend.
Oh yeah, sure. I think he is. Yeah, there was a photograph on Facebook or something. Yeah. With the usual kind of cut off with Paul's selfies.
I'm looking forward to when he gets to the show with this one as well.
Yeah. He did that at Aberdeen last week. Yeah.
The classic.
Paul's with these guys. When for the last 18 months, 2 years, a lot of these chats have been on Zoom, and everyone's the same height. It wasn't until Paul walked into the shop maybe a month ago or something. He walked in to introduce himself in person for the first time. And we're all like, "Holy crap!" It's great. Then you get some people who walk in who are tiny. You don't really take that into consideration when you're doing it on Zoom, is it? Everyone's the same height.
That's it. Everyone's the same height when they're in their dining room, aren't they? It's a funny thing. It's a weird way of connecting with people. I think it's my experience is that it's absolutely opened up whiskey to many, many more people that wouldn't otherwise get to tastings. But at the same time, I did my first tasting through in Aberdeen last week in a year and a half, and just having the ability to read a room and respond to people, you don't really get that the same way when you only see their shoulders and their heads. You don't get to see if people are fidgeting or whatnot. So I think the virtual thing's been great, and I hope it does continue. But I can't wait to get back to speaking to people in real life and actually hearing the sound of a glass saying cheers.
Nice being back.
The worst one for me is when you've got a big crowd and they're all on mute.
You were at the meal with the Aberdeen shop last week, wasn't it? Yeah, that's
right. Yeah.
Were you down for the? I've got the Verdeo kind of sitting out there. So I think it's just empty bottles really now. Were you down? What was that? A couple of years ago when they had a similar kind of event?
Yeah, so they did an event a few years ago with the Verdeo trilogy and an Italian restaurant. That wasn't me that was there. My colleague, who's now retired, Alistair Much, who I'm sure you guys know in Inverurie quite well. It would have been him that had done that, but Alistair retired over the last year there. So, but I went to the festival in Aberdeen the year that we launched the trilogy there. So, got to spend a bit of time trying that whiskey, and again, one of those great experiences where three sister casks can deliver totally different experiences.
Yeah. It was probably, it was before I started. I'm sure Mike would have had no problem with me going to another shops event, but it was before I started working in the shop, and it was probably my first kind of proper delve into Tomatin as well. Fantastic trilogy, and I just love that idea. It got me into this whole thing about events and all the kind of stuff that you do as well, which are just great. Yeah,
even the one we did last week, well, I think it was great in the sense that it's about showing how whiskey can fit into more than just your nosing glass, and as a kind of appreciation thing, which we all love. I'm just turning my internet off here. I'm seeing that I'm on my phone, but there we go. It can be more than just what we've got in our nosing glasses and things like that, and it can be part of meals. It can be part of. It's about experience. My favorite whiskey moments have not been the most rare and wonderful whiskies. They've been the occasion, and I think that's a huge part of it.
We see that all the time. Charlie was on last week talking about Charlie McLean was on last week talking about a trip down to the Tweed with a few of his mates, and he just realised halfway down the road that he hadn't bought a gift, and I can't remember where exactly, but he dived into a service station or something and just bought this bottle of gut rot that, for like 15 quid or something. That'll do.
Yeah.
Came down, gave it to the guest. He was like, "Oh, cheers!" And off they went fishing for the day. And of course, I think there was one fish caught between the 8 of them, but they were cold. They were really, really cold. So they went to the fishing hut to warm up. At the end of the day, they were quite happy. There was one fish landed, and the guy opened the bottle and just poured it between 8 glasses. And he said that everybody was going, "Oh my God, this whiskey's amazing."
Yeah,
but it was nothing to do with the whiskey. It was the fact that they'd had a fantastic day. They were in great company, and they were celebrating the fish that they'd caught with this 15 quid whiskey that everybody said was amazing.
I had a similar thing recently. By no means gut rot. It was a bottle of Glenmorangie Original, which is a lovely dram. But again, if we're talking about appreciation and things, it's a nice whiskey. But most people in the chat here will be beyond that now and into bigger and better things. But I was with some pals out in Torridon, and we'd climbed a couple of Munros and whatnot, and then went for a swim in the sea. I think it was out at Kinlochhew, if I'm not mistaken. And we got back to the hotel at night, and we had a bottle of Glenmorangie Original, and it was myself and 3 non-whiskey drinkers, and we were sitting outside with a nice cigar and the bottle of whiskey. Bottle of whiskey's gone in rapid time, and now these boys have come back and they're starting to message me, going, "Right, I like that. What else can I try?" and things like that. So it's as well as it being a great occasion, it's got some of my pals into whiskey, and I'm going to be able to have more occasions with them, which is a wonderful thing as well.
Yeah,
I think that's it. When we talk about whiskey and creating memories and things, if you've got a happy memory and you remember the whiskey, you'll automatically have an affinity to that whiskey and think that's a good whiskey because I remember having it, and it just stays in your mind. And then you might try it 5 years down the line and you think, "Oh my God, that's awful," but the memory is there of that happiness, and it certainly sticks with you, probably more than any other drink on the go. I think whiskey's certainly got that kind of romantic ideology.
It's certainly something that I try and remind people of, because I think, when we're sitting in a tasting and everyone's talking about non-chill filtered, natural colour, 46% cask strength, these are all wonderful things. But I think the vast majority of people, the whiskey that first got them into whiskey probably wasn't that. It was probably something that was bought from a supermarket or in a bar at 40% with a drop of caramel in it. And that was the start of your journey. So I think, absolutely, we move on from that. We evolve, we develop our palates and go into wonderful world of whiskey. But these other drams, they do have a place, and they're going to open up other people to the experience that you've had. So they can only be good things.
Yeah. First Scotch whiskey I kind of really appreciated was the Dalwhinnie 15, which, again, you can pick up in the supermarkets. It's not your cheapest, but I think you're around about £45 for it. Lovely dram, very easy drinking. Before that, I was a Jameson's and Iceman.
Right.
That's kind of the only whiskey I would ever drink.
Forgiven for that, but that's
I was in many ways worse. I was a Jack and Coke man until I had a Jura Superstition, and that was the one that kind of got me thinking, "Oh wow, that is different,"
Yeah. Guys, if you're watching, it would be great to see you pop on the whiskey that got you into whiskey, and it'd be good to see what kind of level of whiskey is it. Supermarket whiskey? Was it a single cask?
But it is all about the occasion. Think about last weekend. We've you're getting back out on the festivals and doing live tastings, and one of the things I was taken onto the shop to do was to be involved in the tours that we put on as well.
Right.
So last week was my first full day up Speyside, which was brilliant. I mean, I've only been in the shop almost 2 years. But that was my first actual full day tour. But the guys on the fantastic day up Speyside, a couple of distilleries, lunch, stopped off at a couple of nice places. But 2 of the guys said the dram that I gave them when we were all standing on the suspension bridge over the Spey, Aberlour, it was a lovely night. We were watching salmon jump in. We were there for about half an hour, and 2 of the guys said that was their favourite whiskey. And now that I'm thinking about it, they were all good whiskies they had that day. Don't get me wrong. But I wonder if they enjoyed that one even more because of where we were drinking it.
Yeah,
where we actually were at the time.
I think it definitely plays a part, doesn't it? It just, when you're enjoying an experience, I think you're opened up to so much more experience. If you're seeing something for the first time and you're taking that in, you're probably more willing to accept a flavour for the first time. You know, I definitely think that's a huge part of it.
These were a couple of non-whiskey drinkers from Bristol, so
Right.
the whole day was, you know, you can imagine.
I think that experience as well, it builds up that respect for the dram. So even though the taste might not be there, it's that whole kind of the process and the romantic kind of notion of the history and the cask and all that. You kind of buy into that, and you feel that respect for it. It's not a case of, oh, you just sip it like you would in a bar or at home when you pitched your dad's bottle to go to the park or whatever it was. It's a different kind of experience, and you do sip and you savor it. You kind of go beyond the drink, and the full experience comes in, and that really helps you enjoy it. I'm loving Alan Brenner's comment here. Alan's one of our great customers, and quite often on our tastings. His introduction was Kilted Piper Finest. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that one, Scott. £12 for a litre on a ferry over to France. After a pint, the rest of the trip on a deck feeding the seagulls. And I think he inspired that Eric Cantona famous quote: "Why do seagulls follow the trawler?"
That in itself is the experience as well there, you know. But yeah, I think you hope that it doesn't go the other way though, because I've certainly had the experience. You know, our honeymoon was to Rome back in 2014, and I came back with a suitcase full of limoncello. And when I got back to the UK, I realised I really don't like limoncello that much. It was just while I was there and in the moment that I loved it. So hopefully people do go away from Scotland and still have the love for whiskey that they got when they were here.
You need the Italian weather for limoncello, though, don't you?
I don't know.
That and the Costa del Cromarty.
Limoncello's an end of night thing here. Shots of limoncello, that could be. That's when you know it's been a cracking night, and tomorrow's going to be a total disaster. That's a day for lying on the couch and watch British touring catch up with it for the whole day.
We've got some great. So David Muir started off with Bells.
Yeah.
With his dad. We've got Tobias from Germany. Thanks for watching, Tobias. Good to hear from you. Tobias is. I met him on the Isla Whisky Academy. So he was a Bushmills 12-year-old and a Knock-and-Do 12-year-old. Knock-and-Do is brilliant whiskey. And then Phil Lagavulin and Aberlour. Yeah, that's pretty interesting to see the diversity. I'm waiting for a tomato to come up here, Scott. We'll ring the bell when that comes up.
Well, if anyone was drinking blend over 20 years ago, there's a good chance that there was a big drop of tomatin in it. So
tomatin in there, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Ross is on the Macallan 10 Fine Oak and the Sherry many moons ago. Yeah, I think probably. Well, I like I said, I started on the Dalwhinnie, and then I went on to the Balvenie, the 10-year-old Founders Reserve, I think it was. And then they stopped making it, so I thought, I've got to find a new whiskey. So I went on to the Macallan 10-year-old, and they stopped making that. And then I've moved on to the Glendronach Revival, the 15, and of course they stopped making that. I'm sitting here thinking, every I start drinking is this going on. So I guess I'm just going to have to start drinking them all. I'll open my own shop and start drinking them all, so that they can't stop making every whiskey. So.
Yeah. Well, funnily enough, that you should say that about that kind of early days, because when I was looking through the cupboard earlier on today about what I wanted to have to drink tonight, I was absolutely thinking, all my pals are going to be in London and I'm not going to be able to join them this year, so I'm going to have a few drams myself tonight. But I was looking and came across a few things, but I actually found the last of my first ever single malt purchase from the better part of 7 years ago, and the first bottle I ever bought was a 1997 Blether, the second release, and it's an absolutely stunning whiskey. I'm amazed that there's still a little bit left in the bottle, because I fully expect my wife to turn this into a vase, and I'm surprised she's not just poured it down the sink at this stage. But I'm having a wee glass of Southwester from Arran Distillery at the moment, but I'll move on to the Balblair after.
Okay, that's not one I've tried. Not one I've come across from the Arran.
Yeah, so it's I think it's a blended whiskey. But it's mostly peated malts. It definitely comes across that way, and I think it's a Lag Distillery exclusive. So when they built the new distillery, as well as doing a few Macri Moors. They also did this blend, and I was on a similar sort of hangout thing with the guys at Lag, and Mariella was very kind to send a bottle up the road, and I caught up with when you guys were talking about Aberfeldy Dancing Man, and this is another dram that you'll get changed from £20, and it's a wonderful half and half whiskey. That's it's again going back to that thing that if you're wanting to enjoy a dram, that's all you need. A good whiskey and a good beer. Fantastic.
Yeah.
We get some great stories in the chat here. Alan Milton, another customer. The High Commissioner and Dr. Pepper was his introduction to whiskey. He got back from the student flat and somebody tanned all their vodka. So a pal suggested if you bought High Commissioner, nobody would nick it. So that's he got into whiskey. Brilliant. You have to thank that friend for us. John Creasy into Macallan in the early 70s. Only drink whiskey when you could get a duty-free Macallan. Couldn't justify the cost. Yeah, I think there's a lot of that going on now again. We go bottles without a dram and make them last. Yeah, they're supposed to be finished. Absolutely, you don't need to collect them.
Absolutely.
What else have we got? The grouse for Michael Cochrane was the first taste. But Highland Park. Do you find that? Do you think a lot of people kind of go from a blend as a starter, and then into single malts, or is that becoming less and less kind of fashionable now? It's more a malt as a starter point.
That is a great question. I certainly tried blended whiskey before I got into single malt, but I would never say that blended whiskey got me into whiskey. And I think in Scotland, maybe that is quite often the case. Is people probably have had an experience with blend, and then years later gone back and been introduced to whiskey through single malt. I do think a lot of what I'm seeing, especially when you go into whiskey bars and people are kind of going through like flights and they're being introduced and they're going to tastings and things like that, it is single malt led now, which as someone that works for single malt brands predominantly is a great thing. But as someone that likes whiskey, I do worry that kind of single malt snobbery is still there a little bit, and you can have some fantastic drinking experiences with blended whiskey. It exists to be better than the sum of all its parts, and when it's done right, it absolutely is that. So I hope that people, just because you got into single malt doesn't mean you don't drink blends anymore. And never let anyone tell you that something's bad. You have to experience it for yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I'm just seeing Phil's popped up there asking us, what was that non-Scotch you let us try? So myself and Phil are part of a little group chat with a few folk from the Inverness area, and occasionally do some tastings and things. And it tends to be everyone. It's been over the last year or so. I poured samples and put them in. And Phil's always coming up with great whiskies. But we did a tasting a few months back, and it was non-Scotch. It was whiskey, but non-Scotch. And I sent in a rye whiskey that I personally love, but I don't think it won many votes that night. And I was very, very late to the call. And before I got onto the call, I was getting all these messages popping up. I think I was doing a tasting saying, what is this gut rot that you're pouring for us and stuff? It tastes like mop water and stuff like that. The guys weren't a fan, but it was stock and barrel rye, Phil, just in case you... I don't know if you're necessarily looking for a bottle, but that's what it was.
But what was the name of these days? Lock and Stock?
Stock and Barrel.
Stock and Barrel.
I think the distillery is called Stillwater Distillery. It's a Canadian producer.
Hashtag mop water.
Yeah, mop water.
That's definitely a tasting note for the future. I love it.
Yeah. There is also that thing though that you're like, how do you have a recollection of what mop water tastes like?
Yeah, probably the Sunday morning when you're lying on the couch.
Yeah.
When you're leaning over the back of a ferry feeding the seagulls. Yeah, I mean, we just kind of. This is some great comments coming through. I'm just kind of intrigued because I didn't think I was expecting people to have the whiskey, not the full stories to go with it. So it's great. It just jumps on the idea that we were talking about the experience of. Yeah, everyone remembers their first kind of dram, I think.
Yeah,
Phil's been very diplomatic there. Definitely unique.
Definitely unique. He's been too kind. He's been too kind. I think Phil's wanting me to tell him that he was the first person to comment tonight. I think he's wanting me to ban that first comment. Yeah. But no, I think what's really interesting about what's great about the comments here is that what this tells you is that the whiskey that got you into whiskey wasn't drunk in isolation. You know, it wasn't a case of you were given a sample and you sat by yourself and drank it. There's a story there. There's always a story. And I think that is worth remembering.
John Creasy, it's like a trauma column as well here. So John Creasy, we had a friend of my wife came around one night after a breakup. So he gave her a decent shot of his most expensive malt to console her. She also asked for an orange juice and promptly poured it into the malt. I wept for weeks.
Fantastic. No wonder he broke up with her if she's pouring orange juice. She probably did that at the house, and that's why he kicked her out. Oh dear. Yeah, so bittersweet, that one. I think it's yeah. And I suppose people remember whiskey for sad things as well. We have had people in the shop a while ago doing tastings where we've had guys in tears, remembering people who have passed. Just thinking about how old a whiskey is. 21 years old. What were you doing 21 years old ago? And kind of finding that historical, romantic side of things, and then it takes it down a completely different route, and it can be quite emotional as well, I think.
Absolutely. I always remember I was doing a tasting in Canada, and it was this lovely crowd of people. It was a Friday night. I think there was a few kind of like tactical policemen and stuff like that. Then there was this mother and daughter and whatnot. It was brilliant. And we were drinking a particularly old whiskey. I want to say it was like a 1978 or something like that. The kind of the bullet at the end of the night, that kind of, now you've had this and you can go on and love whiskey forever. And I don't know why I asked the question, but I did just sort of say, it was a great crowd. We'd been having a good chat back and forth. And I just sort of said, what were you doing in 1978? I wasn't born, And there were some great comments around the room. There was one of the tactical police guys. That was when he was in college and whatnot. So we were getting some stories about his fraternity day. The mother and daughter, the mum started to well up a little bit. And I was like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I've just looked at the bottle. And the day this was filled into the cask is the day that I was in hospital giving birth to her. And I was like, that's just a tremendous twist of luck that happened. But just like you say, that link to people. I was doing a interview for our distributor in France today, and they were asking how important whiskey is to Scottish culture, and I was saying, it can't be understated. And I was using the phrase, it's the drink of hatches, matches, and dispatches. Your births for wetting the head, your celebration of the wedding, and the funeral dram. It is like if you distilled Scotland and what it was to be Scottish, you would have whiskey. It was very much my response. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That emotional connection, it's a lovely thing to see. It's a scary thing to see when you've got a almost 7-foot German man crying in a tasting in front of you. But other than that, it's quite lovely.
So talking about 1978, I was 12 years old and I was watching Archie Gemmell's school in that wonderful goal against Holland in the World Cup. Which was one of the great experiences I had with my dad. And you're right about that emotional thing. My dad passed a number of years ago, and certainly long before I properly got into malt whiskey. He loved a dram, but it was always blends. But latterly, he started to enjoy a single malt. And it's one of my regrets. I didn't like whiskey earlier, that I could have actually enjoyed it with him. Because you see guys, I take guys out on tours and they're taking their dad out for a tour and stuff like that. I was like, that's great.
Yeah.
But I think it's wonderful. But for me, it's a kind of a bittersweet thing, because I often think I'd have liked to have done that with my dad. But
yeah. And
it's one of those things that I always say to people, if you get a chance to go and share this time with your family, with your dad, with your brother, whatever, go and do it, because it's going to be a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah, my grandfather passed away last year there, but so I got to spend a good bit of time with him whilst I was working in the whiskey industry, and he loved a dram, but he wasn't allowed to drink from about 1990, the year before I was born. He had to stop drinking for health reasons. He was allowed one dram on New Year's. That was very much it. And he was delighted when he found out that I got into the whiskey industry. And then he was devastated to find out that it wasn't Glenmorangie Distillery. I remember I took him, I got one of my favourite memories, I got the chance to take him on a tour of Tomatin and kind of rolled out the red carpet for him, showed him around, told him the history, loved his history. So that probably is how I got my love of history, and I told him everything. And then we went into Warehouse 6. We walked upstairs and we opened a cask from 1976, just the real kind of legendary vintage from Tomatin. And I gave him a dram and I said, I know it's not New Year's, but would you like one? He's like, oh, okay, I'll have a nip. And he took a taste of it. And, you know, this is, anyone that tries this that likes their whiskey, it is jaw-dropping stuff. It's a tropical explosion. I've often said that the only way I can sum it up is if you took a can of pineapples and smashed it on the floor of a second-hand bookshop. It's that kind of just explosion of fruit and dust and everything. And he takes his wee sip and he goes, it's no Glenmorangie though, is it? What more can you do than that?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's going to go one way or the other, isn't it?
Yeah. So there we go. But yeah, no, it was funny because so when he passed away, he left money in a card for my son's birthday, and we were able to buy a bottle of 1980s Glenmorangie 10-year-old to put away and sort of say, you know, when my son turns 18, we'll drink the whiskey that his grandfather used to drink. And I thought that was quite a nice, sweet, again, very emotional kind of twist to it all, but it just goes to show how important whiskey actually is.
Yeah, we get that quite a lot in the shop where people are looking for a bottle for a funeral, and it's so he used to drink Bells and it quite often at that age, that kind of 70-year-olds onwards who are passing now, it tends to be blends that these guys are looking for. They're looking for a miniature of Bells to go in the coffin because that's what you drank and that kind of thing. So people remember that. People remember that part about whoever it was, that they drank a Bell, they drank a Grouse, they drank a malt or whatever it was. They always do.
I don't necessarily know if that's. I don't necessarily know if that's what the marketing team at Bells and Grouse are aiming for. I think they know that their audience is aging, but I don't think they know that their audience is actually dead. So
you can imagine that in the sales chart. Like, so this is the amount of whiskey we sold on trade. This is the off trade, and this is the ones that are lying in coffins for the last year. Yeah, I'm not sure if that would go down.
We saw a spike in miniatures during the pandemic.
So Ross, just on that kind of note, Ross Jolly is one of our good friends. He lost his grandparents to COVID last year. Sorry to hear that, Ross. But he got his old man round for a Cohiba and a pre-2015 Glendronach. So the stuff you used to like, Mike, before you ruined it and it got pulled. So that was his toast to their memory. Just saying, whiskey, brings people together. Absolutely does.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah, I was just going to jump back because we were talking about the Tomatin. I said I would ring the bell when somebody mentioned it, and so Tobias was over in Scotland in the summer. He went up to Tomatin and had his first experience. He was intrigued after the Barfly broadcast that you guys done.
Yeah,
and then they had the 18-year-old handful, which you really enjoyed. So we have got Tomatin fans out there watching. So good stuff.
Finally, we found them. They must be there somewhere.
So if it wasn't for whiskey, Scott, what do you reckon you would be doing? That one out there. This is normally
that is a good one. I have absolutely no idea. I shudder to think. Actually, I think because I've always worked in whiskey since the moment I've actually had a full-time adult job, it's never something I've ever had to think about. Certainly when I was going through university, teaching was kind of the thought that, if I don't have anything else before the end of my degree, I'll probably go and do a year's teaching. But the other thing that I had looked into at a young age was, and I don't know if it's still the case, but certainly when I started going to university, if you got a degree, you could join the police at a higher level. And I'd often thought of joining the police. At that time, I think you had to be like 5'8" and be able to run a mile in under 10 minutes. And I was 6 foot and I could run a mile in 12 minutes, but I was like, I'm a bit taller though. So, so yeah, no, I've honestly never put much thought to it. I'm well aware of how fortunate I am to be in the position that I'm in, and hope to never, ever let that go and be able to move on further on the kind of blending cask selection side of things. But I mean, since I've got into the whiskey industry, I've fallen in love with many more things. I've a passion for sherry now that's come to me through whiskey that I never knew I would have. And if anything, it's just taught me that I absolutely love alcohol. And I don't mean that in like you'll see me down the pub tomorrow morning as the doors open. I've always been whenever we were going out when we were younger and someone said, "Oh, let's go to a club," that was when my eyes rolled back, because I just wanted to sit in a pub and chat to friends. I've always loved what alcohol can do and the drinking experience of it. And yeah, so I would love to think that somehow it would be involved with alcohol. But yeah, I think the role that I'm in right now is almost the pinnacle of what that can be.
I think we've got a few alcohol fans out there. You just reminded me straight away of the great late Sean Locke. One of his tours was all about, he basically came on stage and said, "I've just got to say, my hobby is alcohol. I love drinking. I just love getting drunk." Yeah. And the whole sketch was about his love of alcohol. Mm-hmm. And I think he came on to the 9 out 8 out of 10 cuts does countdown with a can of water. It was beer that he had walked up to.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, he pours it into the glass.
This is canal water. Clearly, you can see it.
Yes, it's some of the most refreshing water I've ever had.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
That was a real loss, that one, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, funny man. So, what about you guys? I think I've heard you ask that question a few times, but I don't know if I've ever heard your answers to it. If not whiskey, then what?
Well, Mike knows what I would have wanted to be. Mike knows what I wanted to be all my life. Clearly,
a professional football player.
Oh no, God Almighty! Well, that guy would have loved that, but that was never going to happen. Well, you know my geekery, so.
Yeah, he would have been a farmer. Definitely a farmer.
Ah, right, okay.
I grew up in not that far from you. I grew up in Strathconnell.
Right.
So I was born in Inverness. My dad was the head gardener at Scott Estate.
Right.
So I spent my life, walking up and down with the farm pail and just being in love with farming and everything about it.
Yeah, I've got a 3-year-old son and have learned more about farming in the last 3 years, and it's always, can we read the Combine Harvester book? And
I'll read it. I'll come up and read it, no problem.
Yeah.
I can tell them.
Scott, that's your bedtime story. Just get the wee one on a Zoom call with Russell. Russell will read the book. We're sorted. I've been hospitality all my life. I started working at the local golf club. As a 13-year-old, my mum owned the kitchen. I worked there for a few years and then went behind the bar and then went to one of the local hotels. So I was going to be hospitality oriented. I did flirt with joining the army, actually. I was due to join up a week before I signed up. I broke my knee in my last army cadet weekend. And they told me it would take about 2 years for it to be fully recovered. So I don't know if I would have maybe gone back to that, or if I hadn't found working in hospitality. I don't know.
Yeah.
It would have been something customer oriented. It would have been some kind of front of house or serving or something. I had a wee stint at Blockbuster as well back in the day when I made everyone's Friday nights special by picking their movies for them. That was always good fun. But yeah, I don't know really what I would have done. Like I said, like you, I've always been involved in the alcohol side of things. So
yeah.
I was in the NHS before I came to work with Mike. So I ended up, my mum was a nurse, so I ended up leaving school at that time in the early 80s, there wasn't an awful lot of opportunities. But that stage, we were down in Aberdeen, so farming wasn't an option because I wouldn't have known anybody. There would have been no kind of ways of actually getting into it. So I thought about the building trade. I applied for about 40 different companies for apprenticeships, but they weren't taking on anybody that didn't have a connection or some kind of link. So there was no chance there. Yeah. And my mum said there's jobs going at the hospital for basically a kind of almost like an apprenticeship, a kind of trainee. It was a cadet thing. Took you on at 16 and eventually said, "Oh, just give me the number for that lady. I'll go and do that." But I always thought, I was of the opinion nursing was for girls. Yeah, so that wasn't something I was going to do. But 40 years later,
it's funny when I applied to university, the two things that I applied for were Scottish history and mental health nursing at the time.
Oh, okay.
And it just ended up going down the history route for no reason other than it was going to be taught in the University of the Highlands and Islands in Inverness, so it was incredibly easy to do that. So no, that's all. And I do remember the same sort of that stereotypical thing even 10, 15 years ago when you told people that that's what you'd applied for. There was a really sort of thing. Absolutely. And my wife, she works in healthcare, works for a nursing home, and so but you do see the wide variety of people working there and how difficult a job it is. I get to travel the world drinking whiskey, and she has to see people at their worst, and it's amazing. But and just going to what you were saying, Mike, I think as well, over the last 2 years, you really got a sense for how much we miss people that love hospitality and people that love providing service for people and making sure that people are enjoying their meal, enjoying whatever they come into the shop to buy, enjoying their blockbuster movie. You realize how important those people are to your life when you don't have them for a year and a half. So the more we can get back out to bars and restaurants, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. I was just thinking, if you had the choice of studying mental health or Scottish history, if you went right down into the doldrums of Scottish history, you might need a mental health nurse.
My dissertation was on James Douglas, the Black Douglas, and it was kind of on his historical reputation, because the way I looked at it was he was the first example of propaganda in Scotland, because the Scots called him the Good Sir James, and the English called him the Black Douglas. And you're going through all these old chronicles that I've got sitting up here, John Barber's The Bruce and things like that, and picking out all these. Luckily, it's translated from Latin now. I don't have to learn Latin because you would need a mental health degree just to do that. But you're reading some of these things, and he was the guy that would cut the fingers off of the archers, and an English priest came up and tried to effectively tell him to cool his jets, to calm down, and he chopped his head off and shoved it where you probably didn't think you could put a grown adult's head, and you're like, what an absolute nut job. But and these characters are dotted throughout our history and nobody knows about them, and it's a fascinating thing.
I was just thinking there's something about being brought up in the Highlands that kind of appreciates that, though. You're kind of like, aye.
Go on. It's when your viewing options are Braveheart or Still Game, and you're like, aye, go on.
We talk about the Battle of Harlaw quite a lot, and the biggest clan battle in the Scottish history.
Of course.
I guess when you think about it, Scott, you and I would have been on the Highlander side, and Mike would have been on the Lowlander side that day.
That's right. Yeah. And that's how, when you say that, you look, the kind of the significance of that is lost in history. And, you sit here today and you're thinking, this is a guy that you work with and you have a dram with. And, if it had been a couple of hundred years ago, you'd have been shooting a musket.
Although having said that, we would have probably got our ass kicked by the Lord of the Isles before they went down south anyway. So we may
you might be there, but it wouldn't have been under duress, probably.
And we've got to remember, Mike went to Army Cadets as well, so.
Oh, you did?
Let's reenact it. We should do that. Let's reenact it.
I can see the headline now. Man in Inverurie gets a shoeing on a Saturday night after whiskey tasting.
You just imagine us taking the guys up to the Harlow Monument 12 o'clock after a tasting and they're running into the field.
Who's from Inverness? Who's from the Islands? Who's from Aberdeen? Who's from Brecon? Right? Well, let's go.
You'll have somebody there going, I don't think this is the best use of GDPR. You know, are you allowed to use this data in this way?
Have them seated in different areas in the tasting room, yeah.
Fantastic.
So I've just poured a couple of the wine casks from your earlier releases here, and I reckon these are amongst my whiskies of the year so far. The range is a range. The Riv Salt, I think, is my outstanding one of the three. Absolutely superb. And I remember the Riv Salt, Riv Salt.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic drams, and I remember when I was actually doing a tasting with another well-known distillery who released a wine cask trilogy, very similar kind of time to yourself. I was in the middle of doing a review on comparing the two Sauternes, and in my opinion, your guys blew the other one out of the water, and I don't say that very often about the other distillery because it is one of my very favorites.
Yeah.
But I do, your casks were absolutely fantastic, and I said that to a couple of guys. I'm not just saying it because you're.
No, you genuinely said that. You came into the shop and said that. I remember you saying that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
It's a shame. In a way, it's good that you don't have that kind of fervor, clamoring to get these bottles, because it means there's more for us. And we can take time and enjoy it. But it's a shame that there isn't that demand for it. You know, and it's kind of, it shows me that branding is key if you want to sell. You know, having that, making sure you're out there, or maybe not out there is the wrong way of putting it.
I don't even know if it's branding. I think it's a gold. It's just a gold award away from being.
Yeah.
You know, because that other distillery you're talking about won whiskey of the year. We'd a particular batch sitting on the shelf for about 3 or 4 months, 12 bottles that were just sitting there. I mean, you know, people were coming in and buying one every now and again because they knew about it. As soon as they won the award, boom, 10 seconds and we're gone. That was it. Yeah, and now you can't get it. You know,
I mean, you guys looking at that, how does that affect you? You know, do you look at it and think, what are we doing that, or what are they doing that we're not? Does that ever come into your mind when you're marketing products, or?
Not massively, and I think it is an interesting thing because although we're not necessarily that kind of cult brand, probably is the best word to use for it. You know, you guys know from the last week there, the whole Campbellton thing. You know, the lorry shows up and the bottles are gone, and that's a wonderful thing to happen. Absolutely, you would love to have that. Of course you would. You can't say that you wouldn't. You would love to be able to release a product and it be gone 100%. But there is the other side where we're a massive company, and you know, to get to the commercial side, we're a top 25 single malt brand globally. We're the biggest independent distillery in the world. You know, it's a massive brand. And I actually kind of like the fact that the bottles sit for a little bit and then people have the chance to discover, you know, because you get that, you know, like a lot of these things that sell immediately, it almost doesn't matter if the whiskey's good. The whiskey's going to sell and people are going to enjoy it, absolutely. Yeah. But for us to be able to sell a release like this, it takes that little bit of embedding in time. It allows me the opportunity to go and do tastings, and the tasting we did with the wine deconstruction, you don't get to do that if all the bottles are sold on day one. And then you get that word of mouth, and that's where people then start to look for the rest of the range, because eventually this stuff's gone. And the way we work is we release our limited editions. We do one release a year effectively, and all we want to do is make sure that by the time the next one comes out, that one from this year's gone. So by the time next year's series comes out, we're hoping that the French collection's gone. And that's, for us, is a sign that the job's been done well. The volume we produce with something like the French collection, for example, we've done 6,000 bottles of each edition, which is small when it's one product. But when you talk about the range of 4, that's 24,000 bottles of malt whiskey to be sold in a year. If we're doing that, we're doing well. and then we'll have another release next year that will build upon that. So I think both sides are great. Absolutely, you'd love to. It's an easy job if everything sells out on day one, but it's a fun job if it takes a little bit longer.
I think
there's also the side of it as well that how much of that other ones are getting drank. Yeah, and I think we always know that when a Tomatin is sold, it's going to be open, it's going to be drank, except for perhaps the 36-year-old or the warehouse editions potentially. But you're kind of.
But you hit the nail on the head with that whole idea about the selling of it, and the difficult thing for me with a lot of these releases that come in is go straight out.
Yeah.
Well, the one easy thing is you don't have to sell it. You don't have to know what it tastes like because it's all sold. But there's something missing there. There's a disconnect between it coming to like us and then going straight out. We've got no connection. That's between the customer and the distillery.
Yeah.
And whereas if a Tomatin comes in and I know what it's like, and I have a conversation with the customer, it's one of my favorite distilleries. I really like this dram. They buy it, then they come back and say, that was great. What else have you got that I might like? Then you've got that relationship. Whereas these releases, you don't. It's just in and gone. And,
And I think as well, that allows us the time to tell people the story of not just that product, but of Tomatin as a whole.
Yeah.
If the whiskey's been sold on day one, and, how much can you actually tell me about that distillery? How much can you tell me about who works there, how the whiskey's made and things like that? Probably not a lot. Whereas with us, by the time you've got your bottle, you know that everybody lives on site. You know that we mature everything on site. You know those little facts, and I think that's part of the brand building thing as well. As well as it being a commercial element now, the products that we're selling now help to sell our products 10 years down the line because every day there's someone new coming to the brand, and that's massively important.
And I just want to tie that into a couple of comments that's come up. So Ross and Phil have both kind of touched on the same idea, just following on what we've talked about. So Ross is asking, what's your go-to from the Tomatin range? He's only tried the 18-year-old, full of Oloroso's loveliness. He wants to know more about the range. And Phil is asking if there's any more sherry matured Tomatin on the way.
Yeah, both great questions. For me, the typical brand ambassador thing, all the whiskies, they're like my children. I could never possibly pick one. I just think that's a bit of a cop-out, to be honest. I absolutely love everything that we produce. I think the reason that I love Tomatin so much is the variety that's on offer. I don't know any other distillery that offers such a diverse range of cask styles and flavors, and it's because we've got this very versatile spirit. But for me, my go-to drinker, I've often called it my Xbox whiskey, is the Tomatin 14-year-old. So when I get home from work, or I say get home from work, when I've left the dining room and our son's in bed and I get to sit down and chill out, whether that's by gaming or watching a film or reading a book, it's more often than not a Tomatin 14-year-old. Wonderful stuff. Matured in tawny port casks that we've bought directly from the Symington family. We're able to do that because we've got the cooperage on site. They've held port for over 50 years. And what I love about it is, and it's the thing I love about whiskey. I was asked earlier on today what type of whiskey I love. And it doesn't have to be it can be fruity, it can be sherried, it can be peated, as long as it's got complexity. I love a whiskey that takes me on a journey, and the 14-year-old does that. It's big, fresh raspberries and strawberries on the nose, nice ginger. And then when you taste it, it's all jam and marmalade. It's all been kind of preserved. So the 14-year-old for me is the one that I probably, most of my staff sales go on the 14-year-old. In terms of sherry matured Tomatin, is there anything else coming out? Well, there's only so much that I can really tell, I guess. I'd be saying next year we have our 125th anniversary, and we're going to be releasing some really nice limited editions for that. A couple of them are at towards the higher end and things, so it's a little bit of cash, but they're wonderful, wonderful things. We talked earlier on about a Kubokken that's coming out towards the end of next year that we've been working on, and that is, if you like sherry matured whiskey that is that has a touch of peat, you're going to be in heaven with that. So yeah, I mean, I think from the cask side of thing at Tomatin, as much as the fact that we're always looking to do something new, the French collection, if you look at Rivesot and Montbazillac, that's very likely the first time anyone's ever seen those names being used in whiskey. And we love to be able to do that. And we're going to do that again next year with some other cask varieties. But we still know what's traditional. We still know what makes a good classic single malt. So, yeah, you'll always see drops of sherry matured Tomatin coming out, and the handfuls at the distillery as well. We've got the Oloroso and we've got the PX.
I was just going to say for Phil, from the if you want a sherry point of view, get yourself up to the distillery, get yourself an Oloroso or a PX. Wonderful stuff. Absolutely wonderful stuff.
Which one was the 18-year-old? Was it the Oloroso was the 18 and the PX was the 12?
No, the other way around. Other way around, yeah. So I think the PX now has tickled over the 20 mark. It's not far away from 20 years old, because we actually had a little parcel of those. So, you know, this was a really funny thing. We started the handfuls maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, and we had a bourbon cask and a sherry cask, both 12 years old. And I'd love to hear that story about Kuboken. But both bourbon and Oloroso, and they became incredibly popular. So we just decided to fire more casks up there, and we added a virgin oak PX and a 1990 and a 1990, and we the PX was quite a slow mover. You know, at the time we were looking at an 18-year-old single cask, so it wasn't cheap in any stretch of the imagination. And then it won. So the Scotch Test Dummies, a couple of guys from America, lovely guys, set up a YouTube channel, and been lucky enough to spend some time with Scott and Bart. But they did a blind sherry shootout. So they both blind tested, I think it was 16 sherry matured whiskies. So you had the Great and Wonderful, you had the Macallans, the Glenfarclases, the Glendronachs, all of the big sherry hitters. And it was the Tomatin PX cask that won for both of them, which was remarkable. And then Roy at Aquavita, he got a chance to try it, and it blew up from there. And it just kind of goes to show how important the quality of whiskey is, because if the quality is good, the word gets out. And if the word gets out to people that are respected in the community, then that blows up. And now we're going through probably a sherry butt, a PX sherry butt every kind of 9 months now. And we're looking at 20-year-old whiskey here. So it's really incredible.
Yeah. And they're both, I had them, well, Russell was up at the distillery, took me back one of each. And I remember when I tried the PX, and I wasn't overwhelmed by it, but we started this track out small scale, just me, about a year and a half ago, and it was the first bottle I reached for when we did our first ever chat. It opened up, and this was about 6 months after we opened it originally. And oh my God, the time in that bottle, just with a little bit of air in it, when I poured it for the second time, it was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. And I mean, on that sherry side of things, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not the biggest fan of sherry bomb whiskies. I've kind of gone through a little stage with them. I loved it. It's very bizarre. The more I got into sherry, the less I enjoyed sherry matured whiskey, which is really, really strange. And I think it almost got to the point of, if I want that flavour, I'm going to go and buy a bottle of Oloroso, you know, or I'm going to go and buy a bottle of PX or a Montego, whatever it may be.
A certain type of sherry, Scott, or just the darker, just the Oloroso and PX? I mean, do you still like a Fino matured sherry? Yeah. So I'm Amontillado, Fino, that kind of thing.
So again, a little bit of a story there. So I know you guys had Ian Forteeth on, and you had Paul on as well. So a few years back now, I was at a show in Belgium, in Ghent, and I was going down an escalator as Paul Dempsey was going up the escalator. And we're talking as we're passing, and he says, "Have you heard about Mackay's trip to Jerez?" And I was saying, "Yes, I have, but I don't know if I'll be able to go." Peter Mackay, who we were talking about earlier on, had gone to Jerez on holiday all his life, and he was arranging a trip with a group from various distilleries. And so there was, I think on the first trip, there was myself, Peter, Paul, Andy Bell from Arran, There was Finn Thompson, who was working with Peter at the time. There was Andy Davidson from Glencairn. There was a chap from Springbank, and we all went to Jerez, and it was like the first time I'd ever been on a lad's holiday, but I kind of got it past the wife by saying it was market research. And it was so good that we went back. And then the second year, Ian Verteeth came, and he'd injured himself playing badminton, so we were carrying him around Jerez in a wheelchair. And I defy anybody to go to Jerez and not fall in love with sherry. In the same way that we were talking about, if you come to Scotland and you experience whiskey, you'll fall in love with it. The same can be said for Jerez. And like I say, we think we do hospitality well in Scotland. These guys put us to shame. It is unbelievable. Sitting at a bodega, Jimenez Spinola, who produce exclusively Pedro Jimenez wines. And we're talking about the PX that we know and love, but they're also making a white table wine with the Pedro Jimenez grape and stuff like that. And you're sitting there at sunset, having this straight from the cask, overlooking the vineyard down into her mind-blowing experiences. So my love of sherry has come through whiskey, but from that experience. And in the summer, there's always a bottle of Fino and Rama or Manzanilla in the fridge. When we start to get to this time of year, I love an Amontillado. I love that kind of transition from the Fino into the Oloroso style. I don't drink too much Oloroso. I do love it when I'm occasionally the group that I was talking about will meet up and we'll have a wine and cheese night, or we'll have a sherry dinner, and I'll drink more Oloroso then. But for me, I do personally prefer the lighter styles. But the best pudding in Scotland is vanilla ice cream with Pedro Jimenez poured over it. You'll never get better than that.
We've had so many sherry chats on. I mean, I guess it probably all started. Well, we knew about you guys anyway because we've obviously spoken about this on tastings and things. But with Annie Manson, Annie Manson's what generation from the Manson family from Glengarry?
She would be fourth generation. I think she's a great granddaughter of John Manson, I think.
But nothing particularly to do with the story now. She runs a cook school in Jerez, and she just went. She started the cook school in London and just went to Jerez. Kind of, I suppose, by accident. She kind of wanted to go somewhere else and landed up there. Got a lovely flat looking across the Straits of Gibraltar to Morocco, and accidentally realised she was right in sherry country and totally loves it. And she talks about Fino Friday and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
She's just such a massive sherry fan. She does sherry masterclasses as well, I think.
Sorry?
Yeah. She does sherry masterclasses as well, I think.
She does sherry masterclasses, sherry tours, and cooking with sherry and all that kind of stuff. So we are looking at doing a trip over to Jerez with the shop to do a week over there, and she's going to organise the bodega visits and all that. So I'm really looking forward to all this kind of lifting so that we can get that on the go.
Yeah, I mean,
when it's on the go.
Yeah, I love when we over the last couple of years, I've started to see more people do kind of sherry tastings in the UK and things like that. But what I would say is, if anyone is interested in the chat tonight and just learning a little bit more and kind of on coming at it from a whiskey perspective, last year we were quite active on the whole virtual side, and we did our own kind of YouTube sessions, and one of them was. It was basically the Sherry Show. I can't even remember what we called it, but it was on the Tomatin YouTube channel. You'll find it. And it's myself, Andy from Arran, Ian Verteeth that was on a couple of weeks ago, and Peter Mackay, just talking about sherry. And each of us covered a different style, and very much coming at it from this kind of, we're not experts, we're enthusiasts, we love drinking it, we've come to it from whiskey. But it gives you like a nice little snapshot into the different styles and how they kind of compare to your whiskey drinking experiences and things. So if you do want to look into a wee bit more, for whiskey drinking people, that's a great way.
And it's great for us to be able to pass it on to customers as well, because there's that whole thing. The sherry bomb is all about Oloroso PX, but actually sherry bombs can be a Fino finish and a Amontillado, and it's just that variation in flavour.
Absolutely. I mean, the roots of the French collection are actually in a series we did a few years ago called Tomatin Quattro, and I don't know if you had much time with that, but a few years ago we were noticing at festivals that there were so many people coming up. This was kind of 2013, 14, and then we launched it in 15. But we were noticing that it was right when sherry bombs were starting to really get their heyday, and people were coming and saying, I love sherry matured whiskey. I love sherry matured whiskey. But what people didn't realize was 9 times out of 10, what they were saying was, I love Oloroso sherry matured whiskey. Yeah. So we released a series called Quattro. Yeah. It was the same distillate. It had all been matured for 9 years in refill hogsheads, vatted together, and then filled into Manzanilla, Fino, Oloroso, and PX casks. And that was the Tomatin Quattro series. And you could see that you love sherry matured whiskey. Try the Fino. See what you think of that. And it's got this lovely sourdough bread, olive oil sort of flavour to it. And they're like, that's not sherry. Well, it's certainly not bourbon, you know.
Yeah,
yeah. So that was a great thing to do. And this kind of educational whiskey is something that we became known for a few years. And I think we've brought it back to an extent with the French collection. And certainly the releases you'll see over the coming years go down that route as well.
Yeah. And one of my favourite whiskies that you guys have ever done was the Tomatin, was the Amontillado.
Yeah.
Just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal.
I have to say shamelessly that it's a bottle of the Amontillado that my laptop is resting on tonight.
Yeah, what a greater bottle to
you know you're doing well in life when.
Absolutely.
I've got about half a bottle left down the stairs. It's one of those
I've got about that much left.
You love but you hate to see you go down and you never want to finish. It's probably one of these. I'm very bad for having whiskies that kind of just sit at that kind of level.
Yeah.
You just know that once it's gone, you're never going to pick it up again. You're never going to find it again.
Yeah.
So well, do you know what I do? I'll do. We're doing a tasting in October, and it's all around decades, but I have a bottle of the Amontillado at cask strength. So before we bottled the Amontillado as a limited edition, we bottled 60 bottles of it for the malt room in Inverness as a single cask bottling for them. And I think I've had one nip out of it. So I'll take that down and we can have a wee dram of that when I come along.
You should have said that, because now everyone who's online would just posted all the
Remember me?
Yeah.
Well, listen, I've not had a sniff of Springbank. I've not had a sniff of Glenelg.
Yeah.
I'm having this Tomatin.
You want to sell out a Tomatin tasting, this is what you do.
All right. I suppose if I just touch on that. So the 22nd of October, we've got deconstructing the decades. So we've got the 5 casks samples that make up the decades 2, from like the earliest is 77.
Yeah,
I think 1977 goes back in 50 years. So yeah, that's going to be so we're filling the sample kits to go out. We still have in-house tasting available. The online is sold out. So if you want to join us, any of you guys who are local or kind of from Aberdeen or whatnot, give us a shout.
Everybody's saying I'm on the way. What day is that?
So what we've got is a 1977 refill hogshead, a 1988 Oloroso sherry butt, a 95 bourbon barrel. I think it's a 2009 Richard Verdeo and a 2013 second fill French oak cask. So outrageous whiskey, you know. We're talking the 1977. If we were to release that as a bottle, it would be $3,000 a bottle, and we're getting to try this in this tasting. So fantastic.
I wish I'd charged more now that you told me
that. Talking about the 2009 Verdeo, I mean, I guess I've got all 3 there, and I did buy a second kit, which I thought was an investment, but I think I'm probably going to end up opening it and drinking it at some point. But my brother-in-law Neil put up the story about the Cabochon, which we started off, and it was very much that kind of silagey farm kind of funk that comes from a lovely peated whiskey, and certainly the Cabochon's in there with that kind of thing. But I wrote a story in a glass. One of the things that myself and my brother-in-law Neil started doing, we just did this whole thing where we just come up with a kind of a story, just an idea, just an experience or a feeling. So I wrote one about one of the Verdeos that I had. And it was that kind of that lovely sponge cake, that jaminess of Victoria sponge, and where that stood in my youth with my mum and dad and what have you. So I wrote a story and I recited it for my interview. for the job in the shop. So, and I gather that was one of the things that actually kind of put me ahead of the rest and give me the job. So Tomatin, I've got a lot for to thank Tomatin for getting me over the edge and getting me a job.
I'm glad your interview went much better than mine then, by the sounds of things.
Well, you got the job as well.
He held it together quite well, so he never mentioned any splitting trousers or anything. It was. I don't think it was a difficult choice. Where we've seen you kind of interview, so it was quite easy. I think my story was a nice anecdote to the whole process.
Yeah, but it's nice that you bring up that kind of the funk of some peated whiskey. You know, I think if you go out west and you have a peated whiskey, it's all about the smoke and things. But when we talk about Kubokken as an example, you know, that's all about that kind of traditional Highland spirit, but with a very modern maturation. So we're going back, you know, 1960 was the last time that Tomatin used peated barley before we started producing whiskey for Kubokken. And it's going down that traditional route, so much so that this year we're going to start using heritage barley varieties. So for our Kubokken production this year, we'll be doing a peated Golden Promise barley through the distillery. And I'm just so excited to see what the spirit's like, because that is the spirit that was made 50 years ago in Tomatin. But then we're going to fill it into this wide variety of casks that we do for the Kubokken brand. So that kind of best of both worlds.
It's quite cool.
I remember you telling us a story about the Sochu casks. There'll be a few people here maybe haven't heard the story about you sort of trying to source the Sochu casks and the surprise invoice that you got.
Yeah. So that's true enough. So I'm actually, it's the one of our products that I'm going to try tonight. I'm so glad that you guys have got so much Tomatin with you, because it kind of lets me have a night off and try my Southwester and my Blether. But I'm going to pour a wee dram of the Shochu cask, which is part of our creations. So I guess we kind of have to go back a little bit to 2005. In 2005, the vast majority of the whiskey that we were selling was blend. We were selling Antiquary, we were selling Big T, and our distillery manager, Dougie Campbell, was just seeing the price of peated whiskey going up and up and up. Wasn't really connected to the commercial side of the business, so didn't realize that, you know, peated whiskey was being sold as single malt for the first time ever, really, you know. And he was looking at the distillery that was producing about 2 million litres a year, was capable of producing 6 million litres a year, and said, well, let's run a little bit longer and make a peated whiskey. And the spirit that he laid down in 2005 is what went on to be Kubokken. And he filled it into bourbon, virgin oak, and Oloroso sherry casks. So from year one, there's always been this kind of exploration to it, this kind of, let's fill it into different casks, let's see what happens. And a few years back, we were given the opportunity to get some Japanese shochu casks. Now, for those that don't know, Tomatin is owned by a company called Takara Shutsu. And Takara Shutsu are one of the biggest shochu and sake producers, I was going to say in Japan, but by virtue in the world. And produce loads of the stuff. And so they said to us, you know, we have some shochu casks, would you like them? We said, absolutely. This was years before it was legal to use shochu casks. You know, I think now that we've released it, we almost forget that law regulation, if you want, only changed a couple of years ago, where you can use a much wider variety of casks than was historically the case. But we brought these casks in 2012 purely because we thought, well, let's see what happens. And the casks come over, we fill them, and we're aware that they're incredibly rare. You know, most Japanese shochu is not matured in oak, but they've started to use oak. And we thought, oh, what a great thing. You know, our owners sending us casks, that's great. And then they sent us an invoice, and the things were 450 quid each. You know, it was some of the most expensive casks we actually bought back in 2012. I love that. But I think that goes to show, how incredibly rare these casks are is the fact that our owners had to charge us for them. And Tomatin Creation 2, it's matured in shochu and virgin oak casks. It's the only single malt that has ever been matured in shochu casks. And I don't know if any other distilleries have that link to a shochu producer that we do. But what I love about it is just that kind of...
It's just extraordinary. I remember doing a tasting with the three of them, with the three creations. And you taste the first two, and they're a lovely blend of Highland and peat and all that kind of things you expect. The peat accentuates the fruit and the spirit and all that kind of stuff. And then you drink the sochu, you nose the sochu, and it's like, wow, what on earth is that? Yeah. But it's wonderful. It's just wonderful farmyard. I love the farmyard funk of a peated whiskey. It's just wonderful. But it just blasts you. Fantastic.
Yeah, I do. You know, we talked about Campbellton a little bit. It does kind of have that Campbellton funk.
Absolutely.
You know, not so much on the mouth. It's a little bit lighter. It's not got that oiliness, but the nose does have that lightly peated Campbellton funk. And
especially if you go through the creations and then take that one last.
Yeah, I mean, especially when Creation 1 has that big Moscatel and beer influence. It's a much heavier. Yeah. And then this is light but funky. I love it. We're down to the last few bottles in the world of this. You know, Creation 3 and 4 will be coming out in February. So this is kind of last chance. We've not got any more shochu casks. We'll probably not get a hold of any more because shochu has exploded and the distilleries over in Japan are reusing the casks now.
And from I suppose from a kind of cask reuse point of view, the fact that you got them over to do that, can they only be used once? Is that
we can certainly use them again.
Is it Japanese oak?
No, so this is the really interesting thing. It's American oak. And that's when you go back to that Japanese oak thing. The shochu producers in Japan aren't even using it because it's that expensive. You know, I was given a quote for Japanese oak hybrid casks. And what I mean by that was that the staves were American oak, but the ends of the cask were Mizunara oak.
Okay.
£2,500.
Oh,
per cask. You know,
is that what, 250? Is that hoggy size or is that 500?
Barrel.
A barrel. 200.
Yeah, and so you're effectively paying £100 a litre plus. You know, and it doesn't make sense because I think Japanese oak, Mizunara oak, has been marketed wonderfully well because when you actually look into it and you look into the research papers, and we're very fortunate that a lot of the suppliers that we work with will send us research papers. And what you find with Mizunara casks is that you really have to be maturing the whiskey in there for 15 years plus before you're going to get any real distinct influence. And that's when you're going to start to get things like that kind of that umami flavor. You're going to get, when it gets to that 15-year-old, there's a wonderful thing with old Japanese single malt that it has like this incense burner kind of aroma to it. Yeah. And that's from Mizunara oak. But you don't get that with a 1-year finish. You don't get that with a 2-year finish. That's long periods of maturation. And quite simply put, if you're spending £2,500 for a cask that is quarter Japanese oak, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get that flavour, you know.
But it's quite porous. It's kind of not very suited to long-term maturation.
What I love is the story about how this wood is sold. Have you ever heard how they sell the Mizunara oak?
No.
So they hold the auction. It's done by auction, and they do it at the tree. So it's almost like a cattle or a livestock auction. You go into the forest, and you're standing there with coopers, piano makers, furniture makers, all these sort of people that use Japanese oak, and they stand and they auction the tree off. And then whoever's bought it gets to use it. So it's a remarkable thing, and I would love to see that. There's something quintessentially Japanese about that as well. I love that.
Yeah. You want to stand with a glass of Kubokin watching that auction, don't you?
Timber! But no, so needless to say, when shochu producers use oak, they use American oak. So going back to what you were asking there, Russell, we can absolutely fill the cask again. We're not going to get the influence of the previous contents. And that's why this creation too is so special because it has that shochu element to it. But we would simply, if we were filling that again, we would simply fill it as a second fill American oak cask. In the same way that if we use a bourbon barrel or a rye cask after that first fill and the residue of the previous contents are gone, even rum, it's second fill American oak for that second fill.
Right. What a great story.
Yeah, it's interesting. All the stories you don't even think about. But I want, that's like right on my bucket list. I want to go see a tree auction now.
I'm definitely going to have Kubokin in my hip flask when I'm doing that. I mean, there's absolutely.
I want to sell off the trees in my back garden now. I just want to get people around to buy it.
It is though. It's an oddly fascinating thing. You would never think about standing auctioning off a tree, but now all I want to do is see it.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if like the hammer,
dirty bugger piano makers, they're stealing all the wood.
Yeah, I wonder if the auctioneer's hammer, what type of wood that's made of.
Do you get the squirrels as well with the tree, or the birds in it? Are they all inclusive, or is that part of the hammer price?
I sold as seen. It's like a third-hand car.
Oh man, that's brilliant! I love it. But yeah, like you say, it's very, very Japanese. I think it's outstanding.
But yeah, no. So we got those casks eventually and managed to get a fantastic whiskey out of it. It was the shochu casks were whiskey that was distilled in December 2006. They were matured in refill hogsheads and then transferred to shochu casks in 2012 and bottled in 2019. So it's a 7-year finish in shochu. We're not talking about a 1-2 month sort of job here.
Yeah. What's the story about the bottle design with the Kubokin?
Yeah, so I'll hold it up so everyone can see it.
Beautiful bottle.
See the bottle there.
There was glasses to go with that as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I've got here is the wee Kubokin glass. Yeah, I think, normally you look at a bottle like this, and you expect the spirit to be inside to be clear. You expect it to be a gin or a vodka. It's only really in the last year or so that whiskey distilleries have started to realise that the vessel that holds their bottle, much like the old Blether, can be beautiful as well. But what we wanted to do with the bottle is tell that story about the combination of smoke and oak. The two parts of the Kubokin whiskey making process are a very traditional Highland spirit with a very modern approach to maturation. And that's what we've got there. I do love the fact that, as you turn it around, especially when it's full of liquid, it does look like smoke is going up through the whiskey. My favourite little tidbit on the packaging is that the carton has, and again, I'm by no means saying judge the whiskey on its package, absolutely drink it and things, but it can still look beautiful. The carton has little specks of grey across it, all the way across it. You maybe don't notice it at first, but as you pull it closer, you see it. And I asked the designer how they did that, and they bought a bag of peat, and they pulverized it and smashed it up and overlaid that. So it's the little design of little specks of peat throughout the packaging, which is really, really cool. What was also very funny was learning how difficult a design agency from Edinburgh found it to buy peat. So they originally wanted to buy a brick of peat, and they got in touch with a supplier and said, I'm looking for some peat. Can you tell us how much it'll cost? And they were quoted hundreds and hundreds of pounds. And they're like, my God, is that how much it costs? And that was the price for a pallet. And they're like, no, we want a brick of peat. And the amount of times the phone got hung up on them, I actually had to go and buy peat from the local merchant and send them.
Did they remember just going to a peat field and just stealing a brick coming out?
yeah, exactly. But no, it was funny that just that two worlds of difference. That was actually a good story as well. The way that I bought the peat. So I had been in LA. This shows you the kind of range of a job of a brand ambassador. I'd been in LA doing tastings. You've got the shirt on, you've got everything on you, lovely got the photo taken beside the Bel Air sign. You know, you're drinking 40-year-old single malt. I flew back to Scotland, landed in Inverness, drove down to Tomatin, got the welly boots out my car, and went to Tomatin Firewood and asked the guy if I could buy a bag of peat from him, and also I was needing kindling from my wood burner. You know, so within the space of 24 hours, I was drinking 40-year-old single malt in Bel Air, and then up to my knees in gutters buying a bag of peat. Yeah, best job in the world.
You wouldn't change it though, would you?
You still got a bit of your writing naff in there. I kind of lost my writing naff a while ago, but it's a shame. That was my saving grace. I came down to 11 years in the Glen. And my dad decided, I have 3 older sisters, they were all in Aberdeen already. So time to move down, job opportunities, all that kind of stuff. I'd have rather stayed. But I went to Bankhead Academy on the edge of Aberdeen.
Yeah.
1,500 pupils. I'd 8 in my primary school. And and my mum researched the whole school uniform thing. So I had the school uniform on the lot, walked up, only to discover there was no school uniform policy. Everybody's there in jeans, denim jackets, what have you. I'm this idiot from out of town with the uniform on. My only saving grace was my accent at the time, which I've lost long ago.
Yeah,
people sort of, where are you from? Oh, Inverness, right enough, and all that kind of stuff. So
were they saying, "Look at that gadgie"?
Look at that gadgie.
It's a very funny thing. It's something that I've actually it's come back to me over the last couple of years, because when you're traveling and doing a lot of tastings, you do have to kind of calm down any accent that you have. I've got a 3-year-old son who'll tell me when there's snow on the Ben, and that's the sign of winter here, Russell. You'll know that very well.
Yeah,
snow on the Ben.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And so you dial that back when you're doing tastings and you're traveling, but when you've spent 18 months at home and you're speaking to your wife every day rather than over the phone and things like that, you start to, what like the day, no bad yourself, and you know yourself and all that. It comes back very quickly. Yeah. Purple rubber bumpers and black plastic bags.
Absolutely.
You guys are even starting to lose me here now. It's like, just to hear Scott saying about drinking 40-year-old whiskey and then getting the wellies on and going up and getting the peat. I can guarantee you, Russell would forgo that 40-year-old whiskey if it meant he could get his wellies on and get up in the
peat. Absolutely.
You know what? I was actually, as I was saying that, I was thinking to myself, I was like, I don't know which one of those memories is more enjoyable, because I'm one of a very lucky small percentage of the global population that can say I've had the opportunity to drink 40-year-old single malt quite often. Yeah, I've only been able to go and buy a bag of peat a couple of times. You know? So that's a more unique experience for me. So
how the other half live, eh?
Absolutely.
It's got a bit of Downton Abbey about it, doesn't it?
It really does. Yeah. So Alistair was born in Inverness. I didn't know that, Alistair. Yeah. So Alistair was the guy we were speaking to you about before we joined on, that opened the bottle of Kilkerran 16 for us and gave us a wee dram in the shop.
Oh, good man, Alistair.
He lived most of his life in Turriff. 1 minute's fit like, the next it's right enough.
So there's a few variations of right enough, because I used to work with a lass from Aviemore, and she was very much right enough. But if you're a bit further north, it's right enough.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
You're talking in there, Russell.
My sister moved to. I didn't realize until I was in the store last week. It was the first time I've ever been to the shop, and I was delighted to be able to see you in person, Mike, after all the virtual things that we've done. But I didn't realize how close to Inverurie my sister had lived for a couple of years. But absolutely, she would come home and she was fit like a day and all that. I remember going into a chip shop with her in Aberdeen and hearing her order the chips, and it was the first person that I'd ever seen her speaking to that also spoke like that. And I could be in Spain right now. You know, this could be anywhere in the world. It was fascinating, just to see how quickly she'd lost the no bad yourself.
Yeah. It's one of the, but as you say, when you're talking, I mean, I don't really think I have much of an accent, but even then, it's the phrases and the isms that you pick up that you say, and when you say something, you look at people like doing a tasting for a group in London or whatever, and you just kind of, especially when you had a couple of whiskies along with the tasting, they just start to flow, and you can see them like, what?
Yeah.
What was that? What? Can you say that again? Sorry. Yeah. You have to.
I remember the first time that I recognised that the word dram was not an international word.
Yeah,
it's a kind of Roman word, isn't it? Or yeah.
Yeah, and so you're doing your little bit of history and whatnot, and then you're like, right, time for a dram, and everyone's like, is that a dance or not a dram's what we call a nip? And they're like, what's a nip?
If they ask that, next time you're just going to say, yeah, it's a dance.
Yeah. But then I'd worry that they would ask me to lead the dance.
Well, the thing is, this whole thing today is the Blether. So I think Greg Schwartz from the Water of Life in LA. He was doing something similar to this, I guess, and I kind of tuned in. And he had Brittany. Gosh, what's her name? She's an actress. I had no idea. I thought she was just part of the production team. And this other musician. And they were all kind of chatting away. And they were saying about when the film comes out in a DVD, they should do a live commentary. And how funny it would be if they did the live commentary while they had whiskey. And it would get worse as it went on. Yeah. And I said, crikey, that sounds like me and Mike on a Blether. I typed in, that sounds like me and Mike on a Blether on a Thursday. So straight away, the last was like, what's a Blether? So Greg said, a Blether exactly what we've been doing for the last hour or so, that this is a Blether. I think, well, actually, you guys are actually, if you were going to be drinking, you'd be havering. What's a haver? That's when a Blether, when you're pissed, having a Blether, that's a haver.
Yeah, I remember putting it on. I think it was the Billy Walker one we put it on, because obviously he's got quite a wide reach. And somebody, I can't remember what country they were from, and they put on, what's a Blether? So I copied the dictionary definition, I pasted it in. And when I did that, I thought, this does not sound appealing at all to somebody who doesn't know, to us a Blether is. And I've just put it up on the phone. So a Blether officially talking a long-winded way without making very much sense. Like, how do you, if you put that, how do you attract somebody to come and watch you if that's your tagline? It's like,
I know. but isn't that what everybody does when they go out, out for a few beers? That's what you do.
Yeah, it's another. It's when you try and explain to people, when you're having an old dram and you try and explain, this is what it smells, what a dunnage warehouse smells like.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, I've never been to a dunnage warehouse. What is it? And you're like, well, it's kind of damp and dusty and fungusy and funky. And they're like, well, I don't want to try that at all.
Yeah, it shouldn't sound attractive, but it is. It's like, when you say it out loud, you're like, how do people drink that? Reading the back of the bottle and getting these tastes, and it's like,
absolutely,
Oh, Russell, you're going down a whole new route now.
I got a big thumbs up from Andrew there. So let's hear it, Andrew. Come on, let's have you. You're not even from this part of the country. You're an Edinburgh boy, Andrew. So let's see what you've learned in your time up here.
Now you guys might be able to correct me if I'm wrong here on the Doric, but somebody told me before, and I think it might have been it was certainly someone within Whisky was telling me that Doric is effectively a bastardization of Scandinavian language, and particularly Swedish. So, like, if we say the baby's crying, the Bern's greeting, but in Sweden it's Berna Gruta, or if you're moving house, you're flitting house, and in Sweden it's flytta husa, and it was something to do with Aberdeen being a Viking trading route with York or something like that.
I've heard it, and the two examples you give them there, but very much give it a bit of origin. I've heard that myself. I haven't studied it, but I've certainly heard that story before as well.
I tell you who it was that told me that. It was Douglas Cook from Inverurie, Dougie. So he speaks like 7 or 8 different. He learns them for fun. You know, I mind being on a train with him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm just learning Gaelic right now." You know, so like I think him that told me that. Yeah, I think it was Dougie that told me that, and I thought it certainly explained a lot, because where else does Doric come from if not from another language altogether? You know.
Yeah. Probably came from a haver.
Or a Blether gone wrong. Right enough.
I mean, before we go too far into the Doric or Scots, Russell and I had this conversation about 4 weeks ago, maybe. We had the 2 Ians back to back with Ian Fertitta and Ian McAllister, and they kind of vied for the longest Blether. And before we get into that kind of territory, we made that conscious effort that, you know, the last 15 minutes or so, you could see we were just glazed and a little bit bleated. So it was like, we made a conscious effort. But let's not go there. But what we want to do is make it so people come back and enjoy it and come back. So we try and keep it, and we're already 45 minutes over time, and I'm going to have to apologise to the wife now profusely for that already. I'm already in the bad books for going out and playing pool last night. So, Scott, Ian, what a great night! What a great night we've had, and I wish somebody commented about an hour ago saying an hour is not long enough to sit and listen to you guys speak to Scott. And it is really not.
We've delivered. You didn't get an hour. You got much more.
Yeah.
Just to prove him right, you know.
Absolutely.
Let's hope for a part 2. We say this every week. We want to do it again, and we'll go back to start. We'll go back and chat. Hopefully, we might have some new Cabochon or some new Tomatin to talk about at 125th anniversary or something celebration or sherry chat. Let's talk about sherry. Something I was wanting.
It'd be quite nice if we've been to Hereth by that time. We can actually trade notes.
100%. And before you go, let me know, and I'll let you know some names and whatnot, and get you into the kind of the good places.
Yeah. Well, stay on for a minute, Scott.
Yep.
So guys, thank you very much for listening. Jumping on. It's been an absolute pleasure. Great fun, and I loved really listening to your whiskey origin stories. How you got into whiskey. I think
this week has been the best conversation from the guys listening. I mean, I know people listen avidly and they give us lots of comments after, but tonight has been the most interactive in terms of the comments. It's been fantastic. Yeah, so thank you very much, guys.
So John Creasy, if you're listening, don't put a comment on like half an hour later, because that's really good. When we finished talking to Charlie, we put off live, and me and Russell kind of stayed back. We often do, and you're welcome to stay back a wee bit after we go off live, and we're chatting and we're talking. Oh, that was great, but we get more relaxed. We're effing and seeing and whatever it was, having a good laugh, and then John just comes up with a question on the comment. I'm like, shit, are we still live? He
just said just now, damn, he's been caught.
I genuinely wish that I had managed to, in some way or another, of all of these things that I've done over the last year and a half, that I had managed to record the sort of 10-15 minutes that goes on after we go off air and kind of compile that together, because it's some of the weirdest conversations you'll ever have, but it's so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Right. Guys,
so
thank you very much.
Next week we should have had Connell from Ardnamurchan. Unfortunately, he's got a situation he can't manage, so we're a bit free. I'm hoping to maybe get some gin talk next week, but we'll watch the space, guys. Hopefully we'll get that arranged. But we are kind of pretty much booked until well into about the end of November, I think.
End of October. I think our next week will be 1st of November.
But next week
wants to come in. That's a good idea. Why don't we invite some of the regular listeners to come on video and have a chat and see what their whiskey?
If we can't get somebody organised. I've asked somebody. We'll wait to hear back. And if we don't, let's do that. Let's do that next week. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. We'll be in touch with you next week. And yeah, Scott, once again, from us at Inverurie Whisky Shop, thank you very much for taking your time out and a little bit extra.
Having you guys.
So, cheers, guys.
Yeah,
Cheers.
sounds-
Enjoy your Thursday.
Have a good one.